Democratic Congressman Ritchie Torres of New York joins us now. He has an opinion piece in the Free Press entitled "The Rising Democratic Coalition Fell. Now What?" Thank you for being on, and I'll start there. Now what?
Well, look, the ground beneath us, may be shifting. Class is increasingly replacing race as the most powerful predictor of voting behavior in American politics. And by class, I mean educational attainment. There were a few congressional districts that saw a greater swing toward Donald Trump than my congressional district, New York 15, in the Bronx. The Bronx is one of the most democratic areas in the country. The median level of educational attainment is a high school diploma or less. In 2012, President Barack Obama won 96% of the vote in the Bronx. 2024, Vice President Harris only won 74%, a more than 20-point swing. Or take Starr County, which is almost exclusively Latino. It has voted for the Democratic Party since the 19th century. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won it by more than 60 percentage points. In 2024, Donald Trump won nearly 60% of the vote. And so for me, the lesson learned from the 2024 election is that voters of color can no longer be treated as a monolith or taken for granted. We as Democrats have to hustle for every vote and every voting block, and no one and nothing can be taken for granted.
So I think we could go on for hours looking back at what happened, but yeah. I'd like to look forward and ask you, because you hear a lot of people saying Democrats failed to meet people where they are. You got to meet people where they are, and you have to have a resounding message that breaks through, right? Great advice. It sounds great, right? I want to know how. I want to know what that looks like exactly, especially in this climate of disinformation, in a climate where clearly Democrats lost terribly in the worst way ever. And we are sitting here, Democrats, in a state of, I think, denial as to how to move forward, or maybe a lack of knowledge as to how to move forward. So educate us. How do you meet people where they are in this climate? What should Democrats be focusing on, and how should they be doing it?
Well, look, for me, the Democratic Party should have a simple mission, which is to lower costs, lower crime rates, make government work for the people rather than for the interest groups. And we have to recognize that working class voters of color are largely in the center on issues like public safety and border security. And we have to meet them where they are. If we swing the pendulum too far to the left, we risk alienating working class people of color. And working class people of color are no different from most Americans. Most Americans want the basics: an affordable cost of living, safe streets, secure borders. And so we should be focused like a laser on delivering the basics and ignore the fashionable nonsense that has taken hold in our politics.
Okay. And when you say swing too far to the left, what do you mean specifically?
Well, in the case of the 2024 election, it was immigration. As I've said repeatedly, I felt the president did too little, too late to secure the border, and we paid a heavy price in the 2024 election. For me, both inflation and immigration were the leading causes of Democratic defeat in 2024. And in the case of immigration, I felt like the Biden administration did make fatal miscalculations that cost us the election.
Congressman, good morning. Great to have you back on the show. I was struck by the term you just used, fashionable nonsense, and you get at some of that in your piece, and you share an anecdote about talking to a white activist who called themselves a police abolitionist, saying, "I'm here to help you. We're going to defund the police. We're going to get rid of the cops." And you said, wait, hang on a second. Can you talk a little bit about that conversation, why you believe that's an important message, too, for Democrats?
Yeah, so I spoke to an activist who was advocating for abolishing the police, and I said, let me get this straight. You want to conduct a social experiment on the lowest income communities of color in places like the Bronx, and what happens if that experiment goes badly? What happens if it leads to an outbreak of gun violence and gang violence and youth violence? Like, you live in a wealthy white neighborhood in an ivory tower, insulated from the consequences of your utopianism, whereas my constituents are poor people of color who have to live with high costs and high crime rates. And we should be speaking to the lived experience of people of color. You know, when you consider some of the most utopian ideas in politics, whether it's abolishing prisons or abolishing the police or abolishing ICE, those ideas do not come from working class people from places like the Bronx. Those ideas typically come from activists and academics who are out of touch with working class people.
So, Congressman, you've spoke about how just now the Democrats have lost at least a portion of their base, this idea of the black, brown, and white voters together. But yet at the same time, we are seeing just now from the new administration memos going out to federal agencies last night saying to pause, to put on leave anyone who they deem a DEI hire, which it is being interpreted as the first step towards eliminating those people. So get us, first of all, just those positions. So give us your reaction just to that news, but also how do you then rectify this? How do you square the circle here from more voters leaning towards Trump, even as the administration takes these steps?
Look, I disapprove of the actions of the Trump administration. And for me, Trump lacks the character to be president of the United States. But I'll speak bluntly. I'm just not aware of I've never had a constituent tell me that his or her highest priority was DEI. My constituents tell me we're concerned about crime rates, about the cost of living, about housing. We want you to focus on those issues. And so that's where my priority is going to lie. I obviously disapprove of just about everything Donald Trump has done so far. But we have to focus on the issues that matter to voters. And, for example, Donald Trump's decision to pardon, the perpetrators of January 6th who assaulted police officers, that's something that's deeply unpopular and deeply offensive to people across the political spectrum. And that's an issue on which we should be focusing.
Congressman, you and I were speaking in the break, and you made that comment about DEI. So going forwards, how do you think your party can position itself as best as possible to take back the House in the 2026 midterms? Is it, as some people have suggested, by making sure that more candidates like yourself from the kind of center-right of the Democratic Party run for office?
Look, I feel like we should, and this is true of every elected official, we should always challenge ourselves to ensure that we're remaining in touch with our constituents. Because when you're in Washington, D.C., you can easily become out of touch, you can easily become insulated. And, when deciding what position to take on an issue, we should ask ourselves, what is the position of the American people? Like, if this were a referendum, how would the American people vote on that issue? Because I feel like you cannot veer too far from the public without risking a public backlash. And on immigration, the pendulum was swung so far to the left that it has led to a public backlash that has made our country more restrictionist, more right-wing, more reactionary, not less.